Hi, Glenn. How are you today?
Hey, Josh. I'm fine. Good to be talking to you.
Nice to talk to you again. Things okay out there, other side of the country?
I'm just back from New Orleans, where the economists had our annual meetings, and it's a city trying to come back from a disaster. It was good to be there. Things are okay. It's intersession. I've got a couple of weeks before my class starts here, and I'm okay.
Good for you. I start this afternoon.
Yeah.
And it's going to take our teaching a class this afternoon. It's going to take our attention away from the real activity in New Hampshire.
Yep.
Where this will be online tomorrow, and I don't know about you. I'm prepared to stick my foot in my mouth, make a fool of myself, give some predictions, and
I don't have any.
Wrong.
I'm not, I'm not an operative. I don't have any independent data. I just read what I read in the newspapers, what I see online, and whatever. So I don't have anything to add to the punditry regarding forecasting election outcomes.
So here's my forecast based on nothing.
You must.
Based on nothing, just because I think, I should.
Mind you, now, along with this glory goes the agony of defeat if you turn out to be wrong.
Oh, no, that's why I'm doing it. I mean, I think I should stick my foot down my throat. So I say 39-32-19 on the Democratic side. Obama 39-32 over Clinton. I think if it had been run yesterday, it would have been 40-30. I think people are going to pause for a moment. And so I think it's going to be slightly tighter than some of the polls over the weekend indicated.
We shall see.
Yeah, we shall see. So 39-32-19. Those are my... and on the Republican side, I say McCain 32, Romney 28, Huckabee 12, Giuliani 9, Ron Paul and Fred will pick up the rest. But I don't think we should dwell on this.
Now, supposing these numbers are right or close to right, what does it all mean? I mean, there's a lot of election left, even if Hillary Clinton comes in second to Obama in New Hampshire. No?
A great deal of election left. And I think my sense is that if they come out this way, if it's 39-32, 7-point spread, it's actually slightly better for Clinton than people are now expecting. And so, just as McCain got a boost coming in fourth in Iowa, but he came out of Iowa, suddenly he was the guy everybody was talking about. I think if Clinton comes in second by fewer than 10 points, certainly fewer than 8 points, she looks a little bit better than she did as a candidate. But,
I'm puzzled by all of this, I must say, as a social scientist, but not a political scientist. I see all of this, if that. I mean, all of this expectations and then interpreting of tea leaves out of these tiny electorates that are, as everyone has noted, not especially representative, et cetera, et cetera. There is such a thing as momentum, but it seems to me that it's largely press-generated. I mean, surely if everybody is writing stories saying your campaign is in disarray, that's bad for your campaign and bad for your election outcomes. But I wonder how objectively informative these early constituencies are or should be for, assessing what are the ultimate and fundamental questions, right? Which is who's going to be able to prevail and who's going to be able to govern effectively.
Right. Well, I mean, I think, what happened with the online betting odds on Clinton-Obama was that, Clinton was running way ahead until Iowa, and they really flipped, and now Obama's running way ahead. Not running way ahead in all national polls by any stretch of the imagination. On the contrary, Clinton's still running ahead on the Democratic side in the national polls, but Obama on the online betting. And I think the reason for that is, this is my speculation, is that one of the biggest things that Clinton had going for her for a very long time was the perception that she was invincible. There were lots of people who've been saying for months, I'm not crazy about her. I think she's going to lose the general election, but I don't see any way that she's going to be stopped in getting the nomination. And I think there's nothing like losing an election, even in Iowa, with some of the small numbers there, as unrepresentative as it is. There's nothing like losing something to puncture the perception of invulnerability, which, as I say, I think was a big thing that she had going for her. But here's my big issue about Clinton. I know you are more enthusiastic about Clinton than I am, and we can talk about some of the reasons.
I will say my piece in due course.
But go ahead.
Well, no, okay. Then you can tell me what your big thing is about Clinton. Yeah. So I know about the high negatives, and I know about everybody being tired of politics as usual, and I know about the Clinton machine and all of its moral ambiguity and the way that it gets done what it needs to get done and so forth and so on. Still, at the end of the day, I'm looking at these candidates, and I'm saying it's not close. There's the A-team, the grown-ups, the veterans, the experienced personnel, the people who actually weathered the storm, the people who governed the country not too badly for 8 years. I think there's a lot to be said for the success of the Democratic administration that was in power in this country between 1992 and 2000. And yes, this is a kind of restoration. No, Hillary Clinton is on the ballot, not Bill Clinton. but one can't help but notice that they're married to each other, that this is a team. This is the A-team. It's the best we've got. Why our party, I'm talking about the Democratic Party, would be in a hurry to scuttle them. Why people would say, oh, she surrounded herself with the likes of Madeleine Albright and others who have deep and long experience and wisdom about actually running a government. Why would she do something like that? She's not surrounded by a bunch of cheery-faced teenagers who were citing their hopes for changing the world and making everything a better place and getting beyond politics. Well, I could go on in this vein for a long time, John, but let me just, I was going to say, Josh, I could go on for a very long time in this vein, but I just want to say one other thing, and that is that we Democrats and liberals are beginning to win the policy arguments. The facts are piling up to show that the storyline that comes out of 1980 and that has been running this country for a quarter century is wrong, is bankrupt on a number of fronts, domestic and foreign. Why would we want to change the subject now? Why would we want to decide that it's not about politics, it's not about any of those arguments? Is the era of big government over or not? Are taxes the enemy of decent and freedom-loving people, or are they not? Should we bully our way through the world, or should we not? Red state, blue state, the red states are wrong about a number of things that are very important to the future of this country. They're wrong about homosexuality. They're wrong about the Bible and the Constitution and the First Amendment. They deserve not to have the power to split the difference with us about who gets appointed to the United States Supreme Court. I'm not prepared to concede any of those arguments, and it befuddles me why, when history has shown the bankruptcy of the conservative, neoconservative, Reagan-esque ideology, in my humble opinion, we Democrats, on the brink of actually sealing that victory, would decide that we were going to call it quits and get out of politics. Okay, so I've said my piece, Josh. Thank you for listening.
No, I'm always happy to listen. So let me make 4 points. First of all, I think it's a little bit unfair to say Hillary Clinton has Madeleine Albright and Barack Obama has a bunch of cheery-faced teenagers, because the fact is that on the policy advice side, people have complained that Obama has surrounded himself with a bunch of Clintonites. Now, you might like his surrounding himself with Clintonites. I mean, he just got endorsed by Bill Bradley the other day.
Yeah, I saw
Bill
that.
Bradley's got, cheery face, but he's not a kid.
No, indeed.
So I think on the policy advice side, I don't think that that's quite right. Secondly, on winning, I agree with you about winning the policy arguments, but in the course of your making that case, you mentioned, do we think the era of big government is over? And I guess, you think the winning side on that argument is that the era of big government is not over. I only remind you that the phrase "the era of big government is over" came from Bill Clinton.
Can I respond to that briefly, which
sure.
is to say, yeah, and I think, that was part of this juggling act.
Absolutely.
That Clinton carried out in the 1990s, which is, fraught with all kinds of problems and difficulties, and certainly couldn't be criticized, but was nevertheless able to prevail in difficult political circumstances.
Absolutely. I mean,
but my belief is that a correction is necessary on that.
Yes.
And I think, given the political wiggle room, that's what Hillary and if he were able, Bill Clinton would do. That is to say, to make a political correction. I mean, how are you going to say it? I mean, no, you're not going to come out and say, let's go do big government.
Yeah.
But you're going to try to establish that roads and bridges, investment in human capital,
You'll
the
try
kinds
to do
of things that
it.
Governments have to be done,
Right. But, I think if we think about the big policy issues, there's healthcare, there's education, there's energy, environment, and then foreign policy, fundamentally, the war in Iraq and making sure that there isn't a war in Iran. I don't see a huge amount of blue sky between Clinton and Obama on those issues. There was a good point in David Brooks had an op-ed on Obama and McCain. Unfortunately, David Brooks is a very thoughtful and interesting guy. Unfortunately, he never misses an opportunity to ass-kiss McCain, and there was a bunch of that in this piece. But on the Obama side of the thing, he's been very thoughtful about Obama, I think. And the thing that he said he really doesn't like about Obama is that for all the talk about being an independent and new politics kind of guy, that Obama's voting record has been pretty consistently indistinguishable from Hillary Clinton's, pretty consistently on the liberal policy side of the fence. And you like that, I like that, but I think it's not right to say that there's a lot of blue sky on the policy side. The crucial issue here is the one that you come back to a bunch of times. So I don't think it's kids. I think, Clinton was the source of the era of big government is over. I think on the policy side, I don't see all that much blue sky. I think there are some issues where Obama is going to be, better and more attentive, I think, on issues about global poverty, maybe on issues about the global environment. Clinton knows more about health care. She screwed it up last time. Maybe she can do better this time. Not all her fault last time, whatever. But the crucial thing is on the politics side. And there's a point that you made a few minutes back, and I think it gets to the heart of the matter about the negatives. So here's the way I see it. Clinton gets elected January 21st, 2009. Her negatives are running at about 46%. And I think you could respond to that in three ways. You could say, you don't think her, no. She'll have her honeymoon too. You don't expect the negatives to be running that high. Or you think that even though the negatives are running that high, she's still going to be able to get stuff done. Or you think if they're going to be 46% for her, they're going to be 44% for Obama. It's going to be the same for everybody. That's what we're stuck with. Now, you think that they're not going to be running that high. And I don't believe that for a second.
Well, I think there's going to be an election, and I think it's going to be hard fought. And if Obama is the candidate, the same things are true. I think Obama is a liberal Democrat. I think Hillary Clinton is a liberal Democrat. I think Obama is an inexperienced liberal Democrat. I think Hillary Clinton is a tough and savvy liberal Democrat. I think the same deadlock that Obama is talking about transcending is what's going to confront him if he actually tries to do any of the things that, from everything that I know about him, and I'm not going to say I know him well, although I have met him on more than one occasion, is true. So I just don't think there's any getting around, 52-48, 53-47. What's the Congress of the United States going to look like, and who's going to have what kind of coattails in 2008? I don't know for sure. But here's what I fear. The scenario that I fear is that Obama is nominated, and he's running against someone like John McCain, and the gravitas issue starts working in places like Ohio and Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and he may have Bill Bradley's endorsement. I know that he's not going to have Joe Lieberman's endorsement, and I don't know where the rest of the Democratic pantheon is going to fall with respect to Barack Obama as a nominee, but. I don't see him walking into the White House at all. I mean, and I just don't know. I mean, I think Bill Clinton is right when he says it's a roll of the dice. I just don't know if he, in his operation, have what it takes at the end of the day. But I do know who the A team is. I'm arguing in the Democratic Party, and that's where I want to put my marbles.
I guess I'm not sure which of two things you're saying. One is, I mean, I agree with you that the general election is going to be 52-48, 53-47. Of course, if it's McCain and
with respect to the negatives, Josh, what I'm saying is, I think at the end of the day, the truly historic character of Hillary Clinton's candidacy. I mean, Barack Obama's candidacy is said to be historic. I don't want to take anything away from it, not at all. Being an African American, I'll harbor a certain amount of pride in an African American doing so well. And the prospect that Barack Obama and his family would be in the White House warms my heart. I assure you, it touches me in a very special way. And yet, I'm not quite sure how to put this. I mean,
you don't think he's up to the job?
No, I don't want to say that. It's not that.
I don't mean permanent. I mean this time around.
George W. Bush is in the White House. I mean, come on. So I mean, I don't want to say. And qualifications. I don't think this is an IQ test. I don't think there are 6 things you check off and then you know who's good or who's bad. But at the end of the day, all of those subtle qualities that are required to actually do this well, Barack Obama hasn't had the opportunity to show us that he has them. So I think it's a roll of the dice, is what I'm saying.
So here's what happens: if Clinton runs against McCain, Clinton can't win independents. She loses to McCain because McCain wins the independents. If McCain runs against Obama, there's a competition for independent voters. That's the way it's coming out. That's why when I don't want to put too much trust in the polls or too much weight on it, but you look at the national polls on head-to-head competition between Clinton and Republican candidates and Obama and Republican candidates, and Obama runs ahead of Clinton against all the Republican candidates, and the reason is that Clinton can't win the independents, and that's why I think she gets into office, and it doesn't really matter that much what the split in Congress is like, and it doesn't really matter that much whether the popular vote is 51-49 or 53-47. What matters is there are lots of people who are going to be devoted from day one, and I think more people who are going to be devoted from day one to making her life miserable than are going to be devoted to making Barack Obama's life miserable from day one. And that's because I do think, and this could be wrong, sure I want to run the experiment, but this is the expectation, is that there is something particularly bitterly, nastily, divisively partisan about contemporary American politics, and that the Clintons are part of that, and Hillary Clinton, as much as Bill Clinton, is part of that, and that the reason that people are liking the Obamas and the Huckabees and the McCains is because they really would like somebody who's not part of that. Now, maybe that's all an illusion. And
I think it's a great mistake. In fact, I'm befuddled by it. Of course they're a part of it. Otherwise, you people would have been steamrolled. I mean, in other words, if they hadn't been a part of it, the left of the American political pantheon would have just been pushed completely off the stage. between
So
what,
here's the difference
1968 and 2000. How Democrats were in the White House for what, 12 years? So of course they've got scars from those battles. Of course they are warriors who have actually had to prevail in the rough and tumble. Otherwise, Tom DeLay and Newt Gingrich and the rest of them, et cetera, et cetera. Even so, look at the United States Supreme Court. Even so, look at the U.S. tax code. Even so, look at the United States position in the world. What might it have been without them?
You think it would have been a lot worse without them. See, that's what they think. They think that they're the last line of defense against complete loss of civilization in the country. And I don't believe that. I think it's gotten to the point now where they're part of that, where they are part of the problem, not part of the solution. And it is a political judgment. It's a judgment about whether or not two people who stand for very similar policy issues, one of whom absolutely has more experience than the other, just knows more than the other, for sure. But does Clinton mobilize the opposition more than Obama does, and thus increase the hurdles, the obstacles to getting anything done? Don't know. But
okay, and what about the woman factor? I mentioned that, but didn't expand on it. I mean, I think, as I said, much has been said about Obama being an African American and about how exciting that is. And that's all very true, and as I said, it tickles a warm spot in me. However, when I step back and think about it for a minute, the tremendously historical implications of a woman becoming president of the United States seem to dwarf in my imagination this kind of symbolic game that we're playing with race. I mean, and again, with due respect to the candidate, this is not I really don't want to be misunderstood. Not a question about his racial authenticity or anything like that. But Barack Obama doesn't represent any profound racial change in this country. Rather, Barack Obama, the phenomenon, represents the transcendence of race. Or the hope for the transcendence of race. I might even add the vain hope, the false hope, the easy hope for the transcendence of race. But again, if I go down too far this line, it'll seem as if I'm smashing a candidate, and I don't mean to do that. But I just mean to say, all this stuff, gushing, even David Brooks and company, gushing about a black, it touches a special place in the American psyche and so forth and so on. Give me a break. Mm-hmm. Racial hierarchy and hegemony is not going anywhere in this country. All you have to do is take a look at the structure of American society. Right? We can flood a great city. The people are scattered hither and yon. I could go on for a long time. I'm not going to with the harangue. The point merely is Barack Obama's ascendancy is not going to change any of that. It's only going to give people a certain narrative in which they can say, aha, you see, we've transcended, we've moved on, and so forth and so on. And again, no disrespect intended to the candidate. However, a woman becoming president of the United States, right? That has multi-generational and profound implications for gender relations and for the hopes, the aspirations, and the possibilities of women in this society. And if we trash Hillary Clinton casually here, that opportunity isn't going to arise again for a generation. I just think that needs to be on the table as well.
I absolutely take the last point about casual trashing, and I think it's an important one. I don't mean to be taking that lightly. I think Hillary Clinton is totally brilliant. She's made a huge contribution to the country, dedicated herself to its improvement, great personal cost to herself in many ways. If she's the nominee, I'll volunteer in support of her. But I think that the country would be, and also I completely agree that it would be of great historic importance, although in terms of transcending gender relations, I don't know, Indira Gandhi, Margaret Thatcher, Golda Meir, I mean, this would not be the first woman head of a government, and I don't think it did a lot for the transformation of gender relations in those places to have in India or in Britain or in Israel to have a woman head of government. But I think it would be a good. I think it would be a good thing. I think that Clinton gets elected, and we are still politically stuck, and I think that's a real problem. But let's shift attention here for a second.
Okay, good.
Said everything to be said on this subject, and then some. Huckabee. I got a problem. I have a problem with Huckabee.
You have a problem with Huckabee. You and a whole lot of Republicans.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, a lot of people have problems with Huckabee, including the leading figures in the Republican Party. Again, the same David Brooks op-ed was all about McCain and Obama. It was as if McCain had won the Iowa primary. Of course, he was maybe partly responding to Bill Kristol's suck up to Huckabee on Monday, but we can come back to Bill Kristol in just a minute.
Let's come back to that.
Just on Huckabee, here's the thing. So we talked in our last conversation about religion. We've talked some about religion in American politics, and this is a deep and complicated. So Huckabee, lots of people have seen this video. Huckabee is asked when the polling numbers are turning around for him in Iowa. Student asks him in a big public event, what explains this? And essentially, Huckabee says, same thing that explained all those loaves being, a couple of loaves of bread turned into enough to feed a crowd of thousands. You can't explain it except by going outside a secular framework. He didn't use the phrase divine intervention, but that's what he obviously meant. Now, there are three hypotheses that you could have about this. Or three concerns that you might have about it. One is, you might say, really a problem that he believes that. Secondly, you might say, well, he can believe whatever he wants to believe. It's really a problem that he said it as whatever he believes, that he said that kind of thing as a presidential candidate. That's not appropriate in politics, whatever he believes. And the third thing is that he didn't. The problem is that he didn't really believe it, and he said it anyway. Now, what do you think about that? Do you think he believes?
Well, my guess is he believes that he's a Baptist preacher. After all, most of the Baptist preachers I know talk exactly like that. Yeah. And in fact, growing up, in the particular corner of American society that I grew up in, black African Methodist Episcopal, South Side of Chicago, working middle class, people talk like that all the time. You could have said it's just kind of a way of talking. I mean, in that he believes it, but he doesn't really believe it. You know what I mean? In other words, it's just a casual way that you assimilate experience in a kind of, everyday language sort of way.
Right.
Nothing grandly theological or profoundly causal in it. Just, the Lord works in mysterious ways, his many wonders to perform.
Yeah.
This kind of
thing.
thing.
The thing about it is, though, Glenn, I'm tempted by that view, as maybe you are. But he kind of, and he did back off a little bit over the following days. And people, you look at this thing I'm sure it's still out there on YouTube. The thing is, he didn't just make it as an offhand, casual remark. This was a response that went on for a couple of minutes. And he said at one point in the thing that he was having a real good time watching all the pundits try to explain, twist and turn to try to explain this turnaround, and the problem was that they just couldn't face the fact that there was no way to explain this without going outside this kind of human secular framework. So this wasn't just a sentence. This was a couple of minute response. And
no, I get it. And it is interesting to me, and I'm moved to speculate. There is no doubt that Huckabee won in Iowa because of the strong support that he had from evangelical Christians who are an element in the Republican Party and a larger element in the Iowa Republican caucuses than in some other places, right? So just at that level, he was mobilizing his people. And I could speculate that he might be, feeling around a little bit for how to get outside this kind of tacit, unwritten boundary that we have on how candidates talk about their religion. And maybe looking for ways to appeal, So George W. Bush was accused, I think accurately, of using coded language from time to time. I remember this, he gave a speech once when he was extolling the virtue of faith-based domestic policy, and he said something about there's power wonder-working power in these institutions. I thought of a hymn, that we all sang in the church. There's power in the blood of the Lamb, wonder-working power in the blood of the Lamb. And I thought, this guy is sending messages, to his religious adherents by using a language that, they'll understand and others won't so well. And maybe Huckabee is trying to push that boundary a little bit. And, the idea, if it were to get abroad in the land, that, God is speaking to the American people through this most unlikely of candidates, whom everybody laughed off, who 10 years ago weighed 320 pounds, et cetera, that God's hand is in this, that he's moving in miraculous and mysterious ways, that he has something grand in store for America. That idea could be politically potent. Right now it would be impossible for Mike Huckabee to foist it, but maybe he's trying to find ways of pushing that idea a little bit more into the consciousness of his...
This goes back to the conversation that we had last time about the literalness of religious language. So suppose he really believes what he said. So I look at what happens with Huckabee, and, I sent the Huckabee video to a conservative colleague of mine, very conservative colleague of mine, who sort of laughed it off and said, gee, I thought he was doing better because it was a weak field. He's got a different explanation.
Well, God could be behind that too.
Yeah, right. Lord works in mysterious ways. But there's an issue about, your point is not that it's important to notice not just that he believes that, of course I think he believes that, but that he thinks it's appropriate to say it. He's a candidate for president, and lots of candidates for president would back off on saying that kind of thing. But he thinks there's nothing wrong with saying that when something good is happening in the world, that that sequence of events happening on Earth right now is a consequence of divine intervention. And a lot of people would, I think it shows an incredible want of self-restraint, a disturbing want of self-restraint on the part of a candidate for president, that he would say that kind of thing. But I guess for me, even more fundamental is the troubling thing is that maybe he really believes that. And it gives me a lot of trouble when I think about somebody sitting in the White House, or elected as president, who sees something good happening and thinks, the hand of God is behind the fact that the surge is working in Iraq. The hand of God is behind the fact that it isn't working, but who sees that, who sees the hand of God operating in those direct, intervening ways, who sees, hey, the climate's getting, it's getting warmer on Earth, hand of God operating.
Well,
I think that's not, I think that does really, it's a troubling view about what makes things work politically. For somebody to have who's commanding that much power, I think it's a disqualification.
People are going to call you a bigot for saying that. They're going to think,
I know. Well, I'm putting it strongly.
This is a way of life for how many tens or hundreds of millions of Americans, and it's a tough job being in the White House. That a man or a woman would fall to their knees and pray. They would prostrate themselves before the Almighty. That they would seek divine guidance and pray for divine intervention. And that they would celebrate hallelujah when that divine intervention, when that prayer is answered. This is the way people run their businesses. It's the way they deal with cancer and death. It's the way that they, live their lives. And why shouldn't a good, God-fearing American carry that into the White House? That's who they are. So, I think that's a pretty strong argument, Josh. I mean, it seems to me it can't be quite so cut and dried. In other words, that the man or the woman would perhaps entertain these kind of things is one thing. But, when they sit down to decide whether or not they're going to, do this or do that, presumably the Council of Economic Advisors is going to get listened to on the basis of the statistical evidence. We're not going to live in, a counter universe to reality, presumably. I mean, can't we imagine a devout person who could manage
Absolutely.
a business or a church or a government and do it well, and nevertheless have this kind of faith in their private life?
Absolutely. That's not what I'm on about.
Okay,
What I'm
I
focusing
misunderstand.
on is there are two issues. One is what you think it's appropriate to say as a presidential candidate or as president when you are in some way speaking for the country. And the country includes a lot of people who believe what Mike Huckabee believes, and that's an important fact about it. But it also includes a lot of people who don't believe that, and what I think you owe is a kind of political argument that sits on some kind of common ground. And I
agree with that 100%.
So that's one point. The second point is so that's an argument about public discourse. It's not an argument about
about leadership and about representing in the office that you might ascend to, representing the people of the United States of America.
Right. But then I think I really listened carefully to what Huckabee said, and I listened to it a few times, and I thought, maybe, taking it overly literally or putting too much of a social scientific hat on. I'm sitting there thinking, gee, I can think of a lot of explanations of why this candidacy has turned around. And I can think of other candidacies that have turned around. I'm thinking Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was not a leading national figure when he started his campaign. And it moved slowly, and suddenly he was a great national figure and won the election. So campaigns turn around. Lots of things make them turn around. The fact that there is a very substantial evangelical component in the Republican base in Iowa makes a big difference here. The fact is, it is a weak field. Giuliani, strong candidate, not running there.
Right.
Anyway, lots of ways of explaining this, and the idea to say, you can twist the things around as much as you want, you can't understand this without divine intervention. I'm troubled by the fact that, not that he was being insincere, I'm troubled by the fact that he was being sincere and that he genuinely believes what he said. Not said in a casual way, not said in a sentence, but in a rather elaborate answer to a question.
Who can deny that it will be a miracle if Mike Huckabee ends up with the nomination? Right. That will have been a miracle performed. So.
Yeah, you're right. I withdraw.
but it seems to me that what about Mitt Romney's speech about his Mormonism or not about his Mormonism? Hello? Romney. So Romney. Basically takes Richard John Newhouse's argument from the naked public square of 25 years or longer ago, and brushes it off. I don't know who wrote that speech for him, but it sounded very Theo Kahn-like to me. Yeah. And, he comes out and he says basically that, okay, there are lots of different ways of believing in God, but for sure, belief in God has got to be a part of what's necessary to run this great country. My words, but that's what I took from it. Would that not have offended you also?
Not quite as much. I didn't like Romney's speech, and I thought that there was... I don't want to get into the theology of Mormonism and Christianity, but it's a hard sell to say that to make the case that Mormons are Christians too. I mean, if you don't believe in the Trinity, you're done. And never mind Mike Huckabee worrying about this, common perception, the common criticism made of Mormons that they think Jesus and the devil were brothers. We don't want to be having that conversation, I think. We got enough troubles without worrying about that kind of thing. But, it's a tough sell to say you're really a Christian even though you don't believe in the Trinity. But, hey, that's, whatever. The reason that the Romney speech worried me less was because partly because it was sort of a little looser, a little more formless. You got to believe in God to run the country. I don't think that that's true. I think I'm a little bit troubled that somebody thinks that that's true, because maybe they think that you can't be a decent, a morally decent person, respectful of others, unless you think we are all created by God in His image. I don't believe that, but I think it's one thing to think that morality and political morality have to have religious foundations. Not something I believe, but I understand why somebody might think that. That's one thing. But to think that in very particular ways, on very particular days, you see the hand of God at work. Yeah. And maybe it's not going to make any difference when the Council of Economic Advisors gets together, and maybe it's not going to make any difference to who you appoint to the Fed, but in lots of other areas of policy, including foreign policy, that perspective about divine, the hand of God being present in very particular ways on very particular days, that I find more troubling than a broad and sweeping statement about there being some kind of religious foundation for basic political morality. Again, not something I agree with, but...
So now on a related, Bill Kristol in the New York Times comes out saying, well, it's not like I'm endorsing Huckabee, but, there's something in the air here, and, Obama's doing well amongst the Democrats, and Huckabee has won Iowa, and, if he were to be the candidate, well, we could think about him actually beating Obama, because Obama's a liberal Democrat, and we don't want to see him in power.
Right, Obama believes...
What was that about? That was his opening salvo as a Monday columnist in the Times.
Yeah, so Bill Kristol, new columnist in the Times. This is the same Bill Kristol who said a few years ago that the Times was, past. Well, he wouldn't have said past prayer. Huckabee might have said past prayer. No, Huckabee wouldn't have said past prayer, because I'm sure Huckabee doesn't think that anyone is past prayer. Anyway, let me get off that subject. But Bill Kristol did say that the Times was hopeless, and now he's been taken on board as a new once a week Monday columnist. And I was, I was kind of happy to see that he was taken on, because I think it's a good idea to have a real diversity of opinion, and I think you've got David Brooks, who's conservative, but not quite so ideologically committed or partisan as Kristol, a little more thoughtful, I think. But you've got, a Bob Herbert, and you've got Maureen Dowd, and you got Frank Rich, and you got Paul Krugman, and this seemed like a good way of introducing another kind of voice. So I was pleased to see it, but then I must say I was pretty put off by his first foray, which was the discussion about Huckabee and the reaction to Huckabee and the Republican establishment. And I guess I felt that there was a different tone in Kristol's thing than it felt more like Fox News comes to the op-ed page than any of the other columnists. And then I thought, well, maybe this is just bias. I kind of agree a lot more with Paul Krugman than I agree with Bill Kristol. So isn't Krugman just as partisan as Kristol? And I don't think so. And here's
well, Josh, let me say something here. I mean, first of all, of course, Bill Kristol trashes the New York Times. That's what you do when you're the editor of the Weekly Standard. I mean, that's how you hold your head up high in the world that you live in. The New York Times is the enemy. But then, of course, the New York Times is also the gray lady, and I mean, it's the paper of record. And if you're in the columnist and punditry business, that's where you want to be. But Bill Kristol isn't. His reputation isn't sullied. Bill Kristol isn't rabid. He's not. He's not too archly partisan. I'm not talking about the particular column. I'm talking about who he is. I mean, read the Weekly Standard. I would want to say to the editors at the New York Times. So is this really just a game of balance? I mean, the appearance of objectivity by giving this guy this this place to voice his views. I think if I had a vote, I would have voted against that one. I mean, didn't this guy, wasn't he a cheerleader on the way to war? I mean, a rabid one?
Well, one of the things...
on the way to a disastrous war?
Well, except he doesn't think it's disastrous. I don't know if you noticed. So when he was summarizing what he doesn't like about Barack Obama, he was very praising of Barack Obama for, as he was hopefully, from his point of view, putting it, for knocking Hillary Clinton out of the race. But then he said, Obama, what's he about? Do we really want more of the nanny state? That's Obama's for the nanny state. And in particular, do we really want a Democrat, and this is a quote about the war in Iraq, who is going to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory in Iraq? This isn't just somebody who was a cheerleader in the run-up to the war. He's very good company on cheerleader run-up to the war. But snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. I mean, we've been fighting this bad war for 5 years now. It achieved one of its objectives early on, which was to get rid of Saddam Hussein. Incredibly humanly damaging, no real resolution in sight, despite the fact that there are parts of I had a note the other day from a former student who's with Naval Special Operations in Anbar Province, and he said, look, in Anbar Province, the war is over. It's not going on. That's the good news. The bad news is that they have nobody's got any idea politically how to run the place, and so it could unwind pretty quickly. But how this all counts as snatching, defeat, that there's a victory in sight. I don't know what Kristol was talking about, but I guess what I thought, when I was thinking about Kristol, I mean, Krugman is very predictable. I mean, that Paul Krugman is going to say, "I told you so." That he's going to say, cut the kumbaya, let's have a food fight. And you also know that he's going to come out on the Democratic side in a policy argument. And this is you also know that he's going to be holding the feet of the Democrats to the fire. So he's been really pushing hard pushing hard at Obama on policy issues,
and it's a good thing.
And it's a good thing too. I think I think it's an important thing. Keep the guy honest. Smiling faces, kumbaya, not enough. Absolutely. So, but Kristol's thing was, I thought, much more a kind of sloganeering, cheerleading, partisanship for the Republican Party, whoever the Republican, Party puts forward. I didn't think that,
that's an aspect of the conservative, neoconservative critique going back a quarter century has been discrediting and delegitimizing the mainstream media. Yeah. Talk radio is a lot about that. It's a lot about, they have told you what the networks, the usual suspects, whatever. Various sociological studies of the opinions of people who work in the press, and in the professoriate, consistently finding them more liberal than counter centers of knowledge, of information, dissemination, and so forth being set up to give another point of view. Fox News's raison d'etre is that, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so now Kristol is a part of that. Kristol has been a part of that from day one, right? Unlike Paul Krugman, I'm sorry how this is going to sound to some people, not a scholar. I'm not saying he's stupid by any means. Bill Kristol used to be a friend of mine. Maybe he still is. I don't know. I don't have anything against him personally. But to say that he was a hack, to say that he's a political operative, I mean, he was Dan Quayle's chief of staff, Bill Bennett's chief of staff before he started editing the Weekly Standard and cheerleading for the extreme right of American politics. He's a hack. Right. So the New York Times has given 1,000 words a week to a hack in order to do this kind of handshake with the other side of the establishment, each one leaning on the other, holding things together. I don't have any respect for it, frankly.
And you distinguish Kristol from David Brooks, who also was, as I remember, one of the founders.
Well, I do. I mean, first of all, David Brooks is a writer.
Yeah.
Bill Kristol's not a writer, and again, with due respect, I mean, I don't think he would try to say he was himself. David Kristol's columns, many of them, are memorable.
Yeah. No, I think David Brooks is terrific.
Just as column artistry, just as journalism.
Yeah.
David Brooks is damned good at what he does.
I just wanted to make sure
he wants to be.
I draw the distinction. I just wanted to make sure that you did. I was checking you.
Yeah. Oh, no, I absolutely do draw the distinction. Yeah. I mean, Brooks annoys me. Yeah. A lot because I don't always agree with him, but he's very good at what he does, which is writing those pieces. I mean, he's an artist at that. He deserves to be in a very good place to post at times or someplace like it.
Yeah.
Bill Kristol, I think of as a political figure and operative and
But let me press you on this because this is the thing that I'm pressing myself on. So I think I read this thing and I think, oh Christ. I think great idea to have this guy come on, and you're telling me I shouldn't have thought that in the first place. Really good idea to have this guy come on. Times is, you got, Herbert and you got Krugman and you've got Maureen Dowd and, you need somebody, you got Frank Rich, you need somebody else who's got a, different perspective. Okay, so I think, this is, good thing to have Kristol on. Then I read the first column and I think this is crap, and it's kind of low grade partisanship. And then I think, well, put yourself in the shoes of somebody who agrees with Kristol, and you're sitting around and you're reading Bob Herbert and you're reading Paul Krugman and you're reading Maureen Dowd and you're reading Frank Rich and you're thinking, crap, low grade partisanship. Is this just a political bias? Is there really anything different other than the conclusions that they come to? And I guess I thought at the end of the day, judging just on the basis of this first foray, that there really was something different, that this was not thoughtful, insightful effort to, reach out intellectually and politically in the way that Brooks's columns are, and that even though Krugman's columns are predictable on the policy side, I think they're also argued, and it's not slogans, there's arguments. The arguments may be wrong, but you muster facts. You don't talk about the nanny state. You don't talk about snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. I just thought that there was something kind of crudely partisan about the Kristol column in the way that I don't think is true for the people who are on the other team, and certainly don't think is true for David Brooks, except when he gets into the bumps up mode with John McCain, which I really wish he would chill on. But I think we are both in need of being in other places, much though we'd like to stay here.
I think that's correct. So
good to
while
talk.
we call it an afternoon, it's always good to talk with you too, Josh.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.
We'll see you. Bye.